Hello and welcome to this alfresco edition of Thinking Aloud, and appropriately enough, given it's the coldest day of the year thus far, we're talking about Scottish independence. Now, some of you might be surprised to learn that I was born way back in 1978, so the majority of my youth was spent in Scotland with a majority of Labour MPs there, but of course a Conservative government down here in London. So, of course, to a degree, me and my contemporaries were aware of the issues surrounding devolution and independence. But really, for the United Kingdom as a whole, it's perhaps only been since that referendum date in 2014 was set in stone that people have been examining the practicalities of independence. Would it be positive for Scotland? Would it be negative for the Union as a whole? Will it ever actually happen? Well, joining me today to try and answer some of those questions are Margaret Curran, Labour MP for Glasgow East, and the Shadow Scottish Secretary, and I think it's fair to say in the no camp in all of this.
Yes, absolutely.
Indeed. And Natalie McGarry, a nationalist blogger and columnist, who I think it's fair to say is very much pro-independence. Natalie, let's start with you first then. Give me an overview. Why do you think that independence after more than 300 years of union is the way for the country to go?
Well, you mentioned devolution, and we've had devolution settlement brought in under the Labour Party for the last number of years. It has been a very successful period in the Scottish Government, and we've seen a big divergence in some of the policies that we've had in the Scottish Government under consecutive Labour, Liberal and then the SNP, where they have kind of diverged on the NHS, on other areas of policy. We have a separate legal system and education. So this is just another step towards bringing democracy closer to the people. I see it as more of a democratic argument than it is about party political or policy issue.
Margaret, I suppose the question to you is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If things have been going well under devolution, then why would we need to change?
Well, I think essentially the core of the argument is, as things stand in Scotland, we have the best of both worlds. We have a strong Scottish Parliament, which does allow us to address our distinct education system, for example. I think there's been great flourishing of the arts in Scotland. I think it allows us to do that. But we also get the advantage of that very successful partnership we have with the rest of the UK, where we can pool resources, we can share risks. And I think when we've seen, through the recent financial crisis, where Scotland would have been in deep financial trouble, the partnership we had with the rest of the UK did help Scotland. I'm very hopeful about Scotland. I'm a very patriotic, proud Scottish person. I think Scotland's best hopes lie by being strong through our Parliament, but also by working with the rest of the UK.
So both of you agree that devolution has been a positive thing for Scotland. I mean, the question that I get most commonly asked when I'm down here in London by my English friends is, why on earth do you want to leave us? What have we done to you?
Well, I think it's not about who's done anything to anybody. It's about setting democratic principles and getting the government that you want. In Scotland, I'm 32, I'm slightly younger than you are, and I've only had the government in Scotland that Scotland has voted for 19 of those 32 years, only 13 of those years. So, I mean, Margaret has mentioned things like we have the best of both worlds. We are currently the fourth most unequal country in the whole of the world. We are possibly in the top 5 of the most geographically imbalanced countries. The UK economy is very much suited to London, the powerhouse of the UK. And I think you see that geographic imbalance in terms of the monies that go to various areas of the UK and about where the balance of democratic majority comes from. We have 59 MPs in Scotland out of a total of over 600. That's not a big impact in terms of policy going forward. And so things like, these are policy things, but they're just examples. On the bedroom tax, we had 80–90% of Scottish MPs voted against them, but they're still implemented in Scotland.
I'm not saying for a second that Scotland doesn't have challenges and there aren't things that we don't want to address in Scotland. As a Labour person, I have real issues that I want to pursue. The problem with the Yes campaign, and with the SNP in particular, is they've never explained why their policies for independence, why the very principle of independence would actually help us address those things. And there's huge risks as things currently stand associated with the case for independence. For example, Alex Salmond has said he will cut corporation tax for Google and Starbucks, but I don't know what I'd be paying. I don't know what would happen to my pension. And there are huge issues we need to address. We don't know what currency we're going to have. We don't know what's going to happen, as I say, to our pensions. The proposal as it currently stands mean the mortgage rate I pay will be set by the Bank of England, which is essentially the bank of a foreign power. That doesn't seem to me to be more democracy. It seems to me to be less over the big things that really matter to people.
I mean, I suppose the question is, again, you know, we do not know what will happen after a positive vote in a referendum. We don't know what will happen with certainty, what will happen to the economy, what will happen to our domestic policy. We don't know how the rest of the world will see us. So in those circumstances, isn't it better the devil you know?
Well, I think it depends on how you want to progress, and certainly in Scotland we have quite a strong brand going forward. We have international links, perhaps through the union, etc. But moving forward, we have to decide whether or not we want to be in a union where we don't have a voice going forward. And Margaret's raised. Well,
Margaret's Shadow Scottish Secretary. Surely there's a voice there.
I'm sure she does. But I mean, we do have challenges in Scotland, but we have the opportunity to change and to take the chance to do a different thing. And you are talking about some of the uncertainties under independence, and there are uncertainties, of course there are, because a lot of the decisions will come down to the policy decisions of a first government. But independence is a democratic argument, and so trying to balance that with a Labour government at Westminster isn't an answer to a democratic problem. Party politics is not an answer to what is fundamentally a democracy issue, and I think that's where we get caught up in this, because at Westminster you can make policies go forward, in Scotland you can make policies. We can't in Scotland constantly be mitigating decisions at Westminster.
Let me pick you up on that.
Yeah.
This is about democracy. And let's deal with the elephant in the room here.
Yeah.
All of the polling shows at the moment that the overwhelming majority of Scots do not want independence. So what chance of a yes vote come the 8th of September 2014?
Can I, because I do think the settled will genuinely of the Scottish people is that they do believe in devolution, and I think that has addressed the democratic deficit that Scots certainly felt. I certainly am a bit older than you both, and in my generation we certainly did feel that, and devolution has fundamentally addressed that. Great attachment to the Scottish Parliament. It's far from perfect, there's a lot of work to be done there, but it does address that, and I do think why the polls are shifting the way they are, and they're shifting against yes month on month actually, is because firstly because those questions haven't been answered and people feel very nervous about that, but also because I think people would feel a sense of loss. You know, I'm Scottish first, I would have to say in all honesty, but that doesn't make me feel any less British.
But isn't this the first time? Isn't this the first time that Scots have actually really properly turned their minds to the issue? And next year, as everything gets a little bit more shortbread tin, castle on a hills, wee Scotty dogs, you know, people at the moment are thinking with their heads. Next year, when they begin to think with their hearts as well, the polls could close dramatically, surely.
Yes, I think there is an emotional dimension to this argument that people have talked about, but I think when you looked at the Olympics last summer, I think there was an assumption on the yes side of the campaign that would be seen as British and seen as far away and not really be part of Scotland. But that didn't happen. I think Scots felt really part of the Olympics. We were all cheering on Mo Farah. So just to finish my point, if that's okay, so I do think people can feel emotionally British and emotionally Scottish. You feel about the armed services. I don't think people want this division, this divisiveness. I think they like the idea of partnership. In a changing world, it's time for partnership where you can do the head and the heart.
See, I don't see it about division. I see about kind of resettling our relationship with the rest of the UK. I was perfectly happy to, you know, I've thoroughly embraced the Olympics. I'm a big gymnastics fan. Beth Tweddle is one of my favourites. That wasn't affected by, you know, wanting a desire for Scottish independence. I think you can feel British, you can feel Scottish. I feel Scottish. Well, Margaret, I particularly am from an Irish background. I feel comfortable with an Irish heritage and a Scottish heritage, and I'm quite happy for my, you know, for my family and all that to be in separate countries. But going forward, independence allows us the chance to redraw a relationship with the rest of the UK.
I return to my original point. Alex Salmond has enfranchised 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland, and still the polls say overwhelmingly that people want the status quo to remain.
Well, Margaret actually mentioned about devolution and that being people's overall will. If you look at the social attitude surveys, if you want to go down the kind of polling route, social attitude surveys have addressed the fact that Scots actually overwhelmingly want control of welfare, and they want control of other areas of policy reserved to Westminster. Now, all of the political parties that are currently arguing for the union were given the opportunity to put a deval max on the ballot paper and they chose not to. Now, they are not willing to say what a no vote means going forward, because actually a no vote is uncertain as well. Ed Miliband has been unable to tell us what the policies are going forward in 2015. So if we're going to look at independence in 2016, perhaps we need to have a bit of certainty about what's going to happen in the UK in 2016. Now, I'm of a generation, I went to university and I had to start paying tuition fees. That has been changed in Scotland, but for the first time going forward, and I'm sure Margaret would agree with this, for the first time going forward, parents are looking at their kids, or grandparents looking at their kids, and thinking that this is the first generation where they might not be better off than their parents because we've got tuition fees. In England, there's the dismantling of the NHS that started under the Labour Party, and so we could go on forever.
We could carry this on for a bit. Let me put you both on the spot very briefly. Both of you, one sentence, yes and no. Your reasons for the way you want people to vote in the independence. Let's start with the yes vote first.
I want people to vote yes because they believe that going forward is the best opportunity for them to take full control over the decisions that are going to affect them and their family, and to make important decisions.
Margaret?
I want people to vote no in the referendum because, as things stand, we have the best of both worlds. We have a strong Scottish Parliament, strong devolution, but we can still be partners as we face a changing world with the rest of the United Kingdom.
Thank you both, Margaret Curran, Natalie McGarry, for what was an interesting and at times tempestuous debate. Well, we promised you answers. We've perhaps ended this edition of Thinking Aloud with rather more questions. We will, of course, have to wait until the 18th of September 2014 to see how Scotland decides upon its future. But of course, this constitutional question is not just something that affects those north of Gretna Green. It affects every constituent part of the United Kingdom, and it's something we should probably all be thinking about. That's your lot for this edition of Thinking Aloud. We'll see you next time.